Welcome to My Safety Tech Podcast with me, your host, Pete Thomas. So we're all good and all three of us are in the podcast. This is awesome because this is the first time that I've done this sort of interviewing multiple people at once. So this will be really interesting to see how that goes. So I'm really pleased. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Let's talk about Plumis. Well, first of all, what is Plumis and how did it start?
Okay, well, it's a good question. So Plumis is a manufacturer of intelligent fire suppression systems. So we're really trying to spearhead the next generation of fire safety. So I met William when I was studying innovation design engineering at Imperial College London. And for your course, you're meant to come up with a product. So you're meant to come up with a product that solves a problem. And for some reason, myself and my colleagues, we said that we'd like to make a difference in an emergency situation. So as part of our research, we went and spoke to evacuation specialists. We went to speak to paramedics. But the conversations that resonated the most were conversations we had with firefighters. They had stories of, rescuing people, some of the challenges that they faced. And it was really through talking to them that they encouraged us to have a look and see if we could come up with some new solutions for addressing fires within the home.
Yeah, at the same time, I was doing my MBA at Imperial, and the whole idea is that the industrial design guys, that's Yusuf Group, would match with the MBA guys, and we'd have the creative and the business side coming together, creating a business plan, and that's what we did. We won that competition in Imperial, and we were invited to be part of the incubator. And the university is still one of our largest shareholders because they came in so early on. And obviously, it's a good even incentive for us to make sure that everything we do, we're protecting the reputation of our big investor, the universities, where we did our course and met in the first time. So, and the curious thing is that when Yusuf pitched his idea, my father had worked some 35 years doing sprinklers, doing at all these big Wormald, Tyco, JCI companies. And I was supposed to have inherited his sprinkler business. I wanted instead to develop new products. And when I saw Yusuf and his colleagues pitching this idea of a easy to retrofit sprinkler, I naively, which is a key thing for starting up a business, thought, oh, this is great. I've got some experience on that. And I also had experience doing product development, having worked some 10 years at Ford, doing engine development before. So we thought it was going to be an easy win because we thought of this as a easy to retrofit alternative to sprinkler that would be more of a home appliance as opposed to something mandated by code.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess anyone listening to the podcast, what actually is the product then? So it's an easy to fit, like easy to retrofit sprinkler for the residential market. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right. We like to call it a targeted fire suppression system. So it's the only system for the home that targets the fire at its source. It's able to do that because we use infrared sensing and an intelligent algorithm. As a result, has two principal benefits. It can operate faster and it uses considerably less water, approximately 10 times less water than a traditional sprinkler system. The speed is a really important aspect as well. When we were doing our research early on and talking to fire engineers, when you're thinking about protecting vulnerable people, one of the, let's say, design characteristics of a traditional system that's a challenge is you have to build up enough heat. The fire has to get to a large enough size in order to break that glass bulb, the temperature threshold that is required. And by using an algorithm, a bit like a rate of rise heat detector, you can get a performance benefit if you're monitoring the temperature over a longer period of time. So this was a capability that we really wanted to introduce into home active fire suppression.
Yes, and it's not like this is the product we came up with in the first place, right? This has been over a 10-year product evolution. When we first started, the idea was it was a a nozzle that would be fitted between your sink and your tap, and that you could easily retrofit it, and it would protect your kitchen. And we quickly found out that although it's a nice product, we had like interest from us going to Dragon's Den and in Wired magazine and all these things. There was absolutely no interest from consumers to have an appliance in their home. They'd prefer to have a better wine cooler than protect their kitchen from fire. And that's the the product market fit exercise that you have to do once you're a startup. So we went through a lot of R&D, a lot of product evolution. So this is probably our fourth product version for us to get to the targeted system that will protect the whole house. But we had to go through a lot of Innovate UK R&D grant funding, a lot of equity investment from private investors, collaboration with Greenwich University, with Ed Gallia's fire safety group, which was amazing. And from all this development experience, what we learned was they nearly hate as much the amount of water that's traditionally used to fight a fire as much as they hate the risk of the fire itself. So that is why there has been so much resistance for sprinklers as a mandatory requirement in any territory where they are mandated. Is not something that developers and architects embrace, and it's because of the amount of water use. So we learned that whatever we did, we had to perform just as well as a sprinkler, but we had to use the small amount of water we were using in our first appliance proposal. And that's where the if you think of it, the obvious conclusion is that you throw all the little water that you have at the fire, as opposed to of spreading it around, in your nice paintings or wherever it is, the stuff that your family photographs, right? That's what the consumer and what insurers worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the biggest challenges with this market, I'm guessing, by the way, so you tell me otherwise, but it's how do you retrofit a product like this?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, active fire suppression systems in general have been challenging to retrofit. If you think about where the biggest need is, it tends for improvements in fire safety. It does tend to be older buildings, perhaps where you have occupants who have moved in who are, have a higher level of risk. But within the existing building structure, if you're trying to install a traditional sprinkler system, often involves sort of bringing down ceilings, sometimes even upgrading your water supply. So either you can run off the main, which involves in a significant sort of increase in the flow and the pressure requirement, or housing a tank. So the way in which we get around this is twofold. The first is by using less water than a power shower. So we thought that if we ensured that we used a really small amount of water, as long as somebody was sort of using their home and there was enough water for their baths and washing machine, there'd be enough water for the system. And the second thing that we did was introduce flexible hosing, and that means and for the system to be dry, and that means you don't have to have a network of pressurized pipe throughout the house. And those two things together address some of the significant challenges for contractors when it comes to retrofitting active fire suppression systems.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just the concept of the pipes being dry. Do you mind if I pick up on that real quick? Because years ago, I was working with Legionella risk assessments and things like that, and people were concerned about the stagnation of water in sprinkler systems. This was a long time ago, so I take it by having the system dry, it doesn't charge effectively until it's needed. Is that right? Because that will completely overcome any of those sort of objections, challenges, or concerns.
Yeah, that's right. The only dead leg that we've got in our system is literally like a 30 centimeter hose between the water connection and the pump. And it's from there that we have a dry line to where our heads are. So it has numerous benefits. Not only do you get rid of that sort of leak risk of having a pressurized system, which can have particular implications if you're your property is susceptible to freezing, for example, things like burst pipes. But the other part to it is that by having a dry pipe, you're also not putting your components under the same sort of aging factors that you would have with a more conventional system. So if you think of it, a dry system is very similar to almost having your pipe stored before the installation. So you remove that leak risk, and you also help the longevity of the system by not having it pressurized under that water load.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what's the range on this thing? So how far does it go with sort of like the infrared? How far can the infrared detect? I'm going to interrupt this for 2 seconds just to tell you about a project. Now, I worked as a safety consultant for a long time, and I know how hard it is to get good quality leads, good clients. I set up a website and got literally no hits. The counter went to like 3 people, and I was embarrassed. It was embarrassing how much money I spent on it for no one to ever find it. It was on like page 10 of Google Ads, and I spent a fortune on advertising in trade publications and never got any feedback, thousands of pounds. And then I had to spend money on making the advert. So I've set up mysafetyconsultant.io. It's a place where you, the seller, can interact directly with your customer, and everyone's welcome. If you're a fire safety consultant, a fire extinguisher technician, fire door inspector, well-being specialist, or if you're a safety software company that sells software to business owners, you're welcome to advertise on mysafetyconsultant.io. So please give it a go. Thank you.
Our system has every spray head, and the spray heads are located just above light switch height. They have a range of 6 meters from the spray head, which is
a big room.
Yeah, well, yeah. Typically, every bedroom you'd have a single spray head, and then if you're in like an open plan kitchen living room, you might have 2 or might have 3. But and one pump can serve 10 heads. But the key thing is that only one head is the one that discharges the water. Always, we never have several heads discharging. The idea is that all the water that you have is going from that one spray head, which is the spray head that sees the fire the best.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like you said, it's about us doing the job, like cracking the walnut with the smallest hammer possible, doing the job with the least amount of sort of residual damage.
One thing I just want to add on to that is, when we started developing the product, we spent a lot of time talking to professors and scientists associated with the International Water Mist Association. They've been really helpful in helping us optimize the product to get the best to make the most of using water mist. Most traditional water mist systems, they mount their nozzles on the ceiling, and they do that because they're really kind of following the traditional sprinkler template. But in order to kind of maximize the benefit of water mist, you want to use its ability to get entrained by the fire. So just to explain that, if you are able to push a significant amount of mist lower down within a room, then a fire draws in oxygen across the floor. So you can actually get a really powerful inerting taking place by ensuring that you have this sort of low level concentration of mist. If you're trying to start from the ceiling, because all of the heat is up there, all of that evaporative cooling has to take place in that hot layer before it reaches the fire. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the design of our blade of water mist and how we target it to make it as efficient as possible.
I'm guessing, is that similar then to like a fire extinguisher where you'd aim it at the base of the fire? Is that a similar sort of concept?
Exactly right. A lot of people talk about water mist even as almost like a volume filling suppressant. So, if you can put enough concentration of mist into an area, it can make it very difficult for a fire to grow or sustain. But what we're talking about is if we're filling that volume in and around the fire with a significant amount of water, because it needs to draw in oxygen to grow, to breathe, it's going to draw in those mist particles, and those are going to turn to steam, displacing the oxygen that feeds the fire and getting rid of the heat.
Yeah, this is amazing. I'm so glad I've got you guys on the show. This is really amazing because I just think about everything that's changed recently in terms of fire safety. One is the awareness of the risks of fire in the UK has increased dramatically since the Grenfell tragedy. Everybody, or it feels like a lot more people, particularly in a residential setting, are now far more aware of how important fire safety is. And, as a result of that, there's been a lot of changes in legislation. So, for example, a lot more businesses now require fire risk assessment than they did previously. And so you're going to find an awful lot of older buildings. And, say I think about, say, holiday lets, for example, where they didn't previously need a fire risk assessment in all cases. So surely your product is just hitting such a need right now in the UK.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a take up. I think you've really articulated well the challenges that we face as an industry and as a sector. The fire safety problem and the landscape is evolving at such a rapid rate. The types of buildings that we have, the occupants that live in those buildings, and even our requirements, whether it's from code or from regulation, is also adapting. And all we're saying with our product is that we want specifiers, we want approvers, we want fire engineers to have more tools to deal with the problem. I always use I like to use the analogy that the sprinkler is like a nail and a hammer. It's a great way of hanging your picture up on the wall. And all we're saying is, well, we've got a drill and a screw. They're both credible ways of holding up your picture, but there's certain situations that call for a nail and a hammer, and there's other ones that call for a screw. And all we're saying is our product has different attributes that might serve those customers in different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, I sort of think about some of the buildings that I've worked in the past, and this, how much call is there from sort of heritage buildings? And I'm guessing I want to use the term like ultra high net worth, but like you think about like stately homes and some of these buildings that are just almost priceless architecture, where the emphasis really is on trying to protect the heritage of these buildings. That surely there must be quite an uptake from those, because in those settings, sprinklers can be quite hard to introduce due to sort of, I'm guessing, due to like listing, like planning regulations and like grade 1, grade 2 listed buildings. Have you had much challenge or opportunity there at all?
We've done a number of buildings in that sector. Sometimes it's been things like a significant use of or significant asbestos within the building.
Yeah.
It might be that they've got ceiling cornices or roses, so they don't want to damage the ceiling. There's all sorts of these kind of different things that come up and can mean, okay, the customer's looking for an alternative. So we've often worked with a number of different solutions. So perhaps we might introduce enhanced detection, so it sends a message to a responsible person. In other scenarios, you can even look to increase the robustness of the product by introducing maybe more heads or things like a battery backup. So it really is a unique tool as a kind of a suite of measures that you can use in those scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to add that you mentioned about the ultra high net worth and heritage
Yes.
versus the usual, rented accommodation. So there are two different, how to say, ecosystems here of fire safety, because the rental accommodation and residences in general tends to be the life safety driven, while the high net worth and heritage tends to be the asset preservation and insurance world. And it's strange because they work completely separate from each other, right? The insurer is not protecting life, they're protecting the property, as is the heritage, the owner of heritage assets. So for these assets, we follow a completely different process because it's very insurance driven, it's very product approval and system approval driven, and that's another. It's a process we've been through for the last 7 years, and we're about to get our international product approval to serve these customers. But at the same time, we have had quite a few pilots being done in the US already to have our system retrofitted into the homes of ultra high net worth as a means to reduce risk. And that is a bigger trend even in the US than it is here, where people are living further and further away from city centers, and it's large spaces, and their fire brigades are not professionally organized. They're volunteer, they're local, and they don't have the geographic reach. So a lot of these homes can't even get insurance because the insurer is just saying, if you have a fire, by the time the fire brigade arrives, there's only going to be ashes to be cooled here. So, and there's no code requirement for a sprinkler. So these homes are built already, and the insurers are specifying a system to get them retrofitted as a means to minimize the risk, the exposure the insurer has, right? So, and it's a similar path on the world of heritage as well, where it's all very insurance driven in terms of I validate this as a solution that in fact will bring your not only you'll reduce the risk of losing this heritage home, but it'll also bring your insurance premium down.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, I can understand that, particularly in rural areas in the world, there's this element of self-sufficiency. And as you were saying that, the story that sprang to mind, and I don't know, you probably will remember this, the Necker Island fire, Richard Branson's house.
Yeah.
And there was that famous newspaper coverage, and I want to say it was Kate Winslet carrying Richard Branson's mother out of a burning building, and it wasn't just the building; it was the reputational damage, but also the risks based on the types of guests that they would have staying in those houses, because they were all very famous, and so, like you say, it's not legislation driven, it's not code driven. In some of these cases, it might not even be insurance driven. It's just reputation and, protection of, their assets, which some of them are priceless,
Yeah, although we can tell you that we have learned painfully that, especially when innovating, the inertia to make a decision to solve the problem of fire safety first comes, it's either code requirement, you're required to do this, otherwise you can't refurbish, build your home, whatever you're doing. Second is the financial return. That's where the insurer is very important. And only then comes the reputational impact, which is what we learned when we had our appliance that was a completely, elective install, improve your life safety of your home and your family, and there was zero uptake for it. So we know that unfortunately the world of it, and you can think that it's soul destroying for us trying to improve fire safety that we're thinking we want just to have a product that for which there will be voluntary adoption because they see the value in it. And the problem really is that there are not enough fires for people to perceive this as an actual risk that deserves the investment. So it becomes code, it becomes insurers that create those incentives for that investment, right? It's usually the last thing that drives the adoption of fire safety is the reputation or the actual perception of risk by the user.
I think just to build on that point, I can think of two instances. So we had pretty early on in our entrepreneurial journey, we had an incident where a council was rehousing an arsonist, and they decided to have the system installed because of their, let's say, their inclination to start fires. And for this particular individual believed that there were aliens in their loft, so they started a fire in their living room, and the system activated. It put it out before the fire brigade arrived. We were really happy. This was a real success. It was sort of evidence that our system worked for a challenging fire. But the organization council didn't want us to do any sort of press releases about it because they were concerned about the fact that they had to rehouse some arsonists in and around sort of people with sort of general needs. And we've had similar incidences take place with sort of student accommodation or other housing associations. As much as they are sort of concerned about and are making steps to protect those individuals, talking about some of the success A lot of the time they don't really want to draw attention to these sorts of things. So there's an inherent challenge there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm just thinking, we talked a little bit about code. You guys know that I spoke to Andy Spence P50 Fire Extinguishers Britannia. He was on the podcast, and we had a really, really interesting conversation about guidance, standards. And it was quite interesting because we almost got to this point where we sort of said that, I sort of said that, are the standards stifling innovation by maintaining the status quo? Because when you have standard, it usually tells you what your responsibilities are to maintain or adhere or, service, inspect, whatever the current process is. And those standards don't tend to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, updated for 10 years. Well, we live in a society that's very, very fast moving, with all forms of innovation and transformation at the moment. And 10 years just feels very slow in terms of really embracing innovation and creativity and all of the improvements that people must want to bring to fire safety. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think on this one, it's taken us a long time to kind of get our heads around the system and how it works. The first thing that I would say is that I don't think we would have our product developed in the way that we have if it wasn't for the UK system. So the standards theoretically are very inclusive of innovation. They have, as a code of practice, there's flexibility for you to innovate as long as you can demonstrate that you're improving things, improving the performance. But our challenge here in the UK is the interpretation, or I believe the misinterpretation sometimes of the role of standards and the way in which they're used. So, William he went to the BSI training to really learn a lot more about standards and how they work.
So I am, in fact, not too different from Andy. And Andy's a great guy and has helped us immensely, but not too different from Andy. We're innovators who are participating in standards committee. So I participate on the water mist committee in BSI and also in the European level. And the most shocking, I'd say, experience I had was going through all the training that BSI offers of how to write standards, the implications with law. And it was quite shocking just to learn that how well-intentioned and well-written standards are, and at the same time understanding and finally having the insight of how poorly they're utilized by the real world outside. So codes of practice are great. They set a minimum best practice experience. It's aggregated experience showing what best practice is. But at the same time, it's only one of the ways in which you can meet either regulation for whatever is it that you're trying to do. In our case, is providing the silo we're in basically is the one where you're providing water-based fire suppression into a property. And so as exactly as Yusuf says, the problem is not with the standard. The standard is great. The concept behind it. In fact, we are great fans of the document called BS0, which is the standards of standards. And it just shows that how standards are written are to ensure that there's innovation, that it allows competition, that it allows evolution to happen. But the problem is that the misuse of the standards, where a lot of the time incumbents just pitch the standards as if it was law and as if it was inflexible. So standards are not designed to be, especially codes of practice in the British standard system. It's different if you're talking about the US or if you're talking about European specifications. There are different types of standards. But the codes of practice in the UK, where when the question is asked in the built environment about compliant, it tends to be with respect to codes of practice. These are intended to be flexible. They're intended to allow you to deviate from them as long as you can explain that the outcome is the same or better. And what we try to do, and we do all the time, is that we try to improve on existing clauses of the standard and demonstrate how it performs better. And unfortunately, the interpretation from the industry is that it is being non-compliant. It's not performing as intended because it doesn't fully comply. And that, even as a mindset by the gatekeepers in the industry, creates an incentive for manufacturers and installers to just state compliance, falsely state compliance, which then results in bad practices and results in things failing. So that's exactly what happened in the world of in the Grenfell strategy, was declaration of compliance when there wasn't actually one, and those the gatekeepers that were supposed to control that and do thorough due diligence, they just accept the statement of compliance in its face value. And we try to do the other way around, which is we talk about the principles, we say how that fits to the standards, how it doesn't, and how we tweak things and improve things so that your outcome is even better. And it's crazy that we're following, we love the principles of the standards, but the most stakeholders do not understand it and can't get their head around it. And that is what stifles innovation, is the practical use of standards, not the standards themselves.
Yeah, I think William really articulated it. It's there's almost a bias or an inclination with standards to think of them as, this is how I can tick a box. It's a shortcut in terms of the work that the approver or the designer has to the due diligence that they have to do, because somebody else has done the work. If they're declaring compliance to the standard, that means, the box is ticked, this is fine. When we believe in every case, you really do need to keep doing the due diligence. On the plus side, because we're different, we often have to explain, explain again, present the evidence to really show to people, this is why we're doing things differently. So we get that scrutiny, that due diligence, that intrigue often happens when our product is being specified. And we think that there's value in that, because everybody understands the process, they might understand the limitations. So it's that trade-off of the benefit of a shortcut offers, but can also sort of hinder the understanding as well within that space.
Yeah, that's right. I like the word misunderstanding. So when I look at, say, British standards, I'm going to say I don't think it helps that BSI charge for the British standards. I'm just going to put it out there. You don't have to agree with me. But, I see it all the time, and people will go, oh, yeah, but, BS 8214 says, and then you go, all right, well, let me just go and double check that. And then you go on the BSI website and go, can I have a look at BS 8214, which I think is timber fire door assemblies or something. And then you'll look and it will say, yeah, but you got to pay for it. It'll cost you, I don't know, whatever. Sometimes £100, sometimes £300. Most companies don't have hundreds of pounds to buy that. And unless you know someone, all you're getting is a third party interpretation. And I see this all the time when you go, okay, what does the investigation period need to be on a fire alarm system? And then it's so-and-so fire alarm maintainers.co.uk are telling you what their interpretation is and then how you should adhere to it. And that does create misunderstanding because you can't go back to the actual standard itself.
Yeah, no, it's curious you say that, because UL in the US, so UL is one of the official publisher of the American standards, the ASTM, and they do charge for their standards, but they were sued saying that you're doing exactly what you said, which is you're limiting the ability of people to do their job properly by charging for the standards. So what happens now is that UL offer free viewing of the standard, but if you want to print it out, you have to pay for it. So there's a hurdle, right? There's a difficulty for you to have to use the standard fully, but at least you have the free visibility of it. You can view it and you can go to specific clauses if that's what you need to do. So your You're completely right in that, because that's been proven in the US already. And I remember having said that, even I gave that feedback to BSI, and they say, there's no way you can get it to be funded unless it's done like this. There's all this organization. Well, and I'll say, well, that's the same in UL in the US. So somehow they managed to still charge it. And those who were buying them before seem to continue to be buying them. They want to continue to have specially printed copies that they can look into. And now even NFPA offer better facilities that you can link standards and reference each other. So they're putting intelligence into standards. So it's not just that printed paper. And now people are paying for that benefit. So I agree exactly 100% with what you're saying. And the US is, I think, a few steps ahead in solving that problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you would be hard pushed to find someone in the industry who would say there wouldn't be a net benefit to everyone, to society as a whole, if there was more knowledge, reading, understanding of all of the standards. You know, so if we're looking for areas where BSI could innovate and improve things, I think that's an obvious one.
Yes, but I'll add one thing, which is there is a British standard which is free and will always be free, and that's BS
Okay.
Bureau. And that's the one that the industry should know the most about. That's the one that we learnt the most through, because it explains what the intent of standards are and what's the scope and their limitations and everything like that. So that's the one that's always free and you can read it. So, and we were introduced by Sir Ken Knight of that standard. He's the chair of that committee in BSI, and it was just like a brain blower. It was a mind-blowing experience just seeing that that text actually exists and it's free for use, so you don't have to pay for that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's just for clarity, if people are googling it, it details the principles of standardization. So, what is a standard? How does it work? Where is it flexible? Where is it not? Definitely worth a read.
Yeah, that honestly, I couldn't agree more, because, and you'll find this with nearly all of the standards. So I'm thinking to HDM's, the Healthcare Technical Memorandum. I'm pretty sure there's a 00 series, which if you're really into that world, then that would be considered one of the most important.
Yeah, and it was never our intention to become specialists in standards, but when you're trying to innovate and you struggle and you're told that you're not doing things properly, you're thinking, okay, wait a second, let me understand exactly what the rules here are. And then we understand that no, we are playing by the rules, and it's mostly a lot of the competition that it's misusing those rules for their benefit. And you're like, I can't believe it. Yeah. So we only wanted to do like a better fire protection product, and we became standards experts.
Yeah, and even on that journey, we trained to become fire engineers. Most of the people who were on the course were looking to practice, or they were wanting to do it as a day job. But we just wanted to make sure that we had good understanding of what we're talking about. What are the principles? What are the objectives even of an active fire suppression system? So I think that is part of the, let's say, the requirement of being an innovator is really you have to have a good understanding of the context and the rationale, because it often gets forgotten when you're just focusing on ticking a box. Sometimes you're not actually talking about what is the objective that the box is trying to achieve. So that's something we spent a lot of time investing in as well.
That's amazing. So what kind of pushback, if any, did you get when you started to try and launch this product?
Oh, we never got any pushback. It's
Oh,
been
cool.
so smooth. Yeah.
I mean, it's been all sorts of things. Anything from reasons why you cannot use it, or reasons why it will not work. When we get that sort of, let's say, criticism, oh, have you thought about your product in this way? If it is a question that we haven't answered, we'll go and do a test to find out the answer. We want the evidence. We want to be able to confidently go out in the marketplace and say, we know what we're talking about. So there's been all sorts of things. Well, will it work in this scenario? Will it work in that one? It doesn't meet this standard. So all of these parts, the fire engineering, the fire testing that we've done, learning about standards, has been a response to feedback that we've had from people saying, "Oh, can you really do that?" We have to get to the bottom of those answers.
Yeah, I'll give you early example that we had, which was we had a fire engineer look at our system in the early days once we were offering it as an appliance and nobody wanted, and a customer was asking it to be used in a loft conversion, and saying, "Look, my building control would like to understand this more," and we didn't even know what building control was or who was the building control officer or anything like that. So what they did what rarely building control officers do today, which is a thorough due diligence of our system. But that's because he was an experienced fire engineer, and he says, well, in fact, this system could be used for a loft conversion because today, as a suppression system, a sprinkler is the typical recommendation, but even a sprinkler is overkill for what the fire engineering requirement is for loft conversion. You don't want the fire to spread from the room of origin, and your system is doing that well enough. So I'll accept it only for a loft conversion. So it's where Yusuf was talking about the nail and the screw. The fire engineer was saying, we only need a screw here. You don't need the giant nail, and it's fine for that. But when the nail hammer manufacturer understand that it's replacing a nail and hammer and interpret it as a full replacement, that it could go anywhere, then there's tension. So we've tried to make it very clear that it's very specific applications where our system works best for, and it's not for the generic high-rise full retro or full new build install. It wouldn't be even cost effective to do it in the first place. So we're very specific, but that's where pushback has come. And as Yusuf was saying, every time we get pushback, it forces us to learn a bit more and then find out how we can do things better. This is like the Nassim Taleb logic of anti-fragile, right? Whatever is making you stronger at every punch you get. So that has worked beautifully, which is why we are on our 4th product iteration, and we know what the 5th is going to be, because we know where the opportunities for even improving the product further are. And it's just curious that there's nobody else in the industry doing that, right? In terms of in our segment of active fire protection, just trying to improve and improve. They're very stuck to what the standard has told them is a best practice without any incentive of improving it, because they themselves interpret the code of practice as an inflexible, rigid recipe to be followed.
I think the loft conversion case has been such a significant one for us. So we went back and we had a look at the fire engineering justification for why a sprinkler was used in that scenario. What is a sprinkler looking to achieve? So just to explain the usage case, when you've got open plan, say on your ground floor, the role of the sprinkler is to stop the escape route being compromised, or allow someone to get from let's say the room on the 3rd floor out of the front door and not be compromised by smoke and toxic gases that might fill the space. So it's being used as a replacement to compartmentation. Now, in order for us to really feel confident that we had a solution that would work well in this space, we were looking at what are the attributes that the fire engineer is making best use of. And so much of fire safety is around time. You've got your R set, your A set, you've got a time rating, from a fire door. Time is such a key element when you're thinking about means of escape. So as a result, we developed the system to really operate at the earliest possible time, because we know we want to give that occupant the most amount of time before their escape route is flooded with toxic products. So in order to help fire engineers and people understand this, we did a suite of fire testing, at the Fire Protection Association. We then had that data validated by chartered fire engineers who wrote peer-reviewed papers, which were published in Fire Magazine and the Fire Safety Journal, to characterize the performance of our system in terms of RTI, which is a sprinkler attribute. It's the response time index. But it's just kind of building up that knowledge so that rather than thinking, does the product tick the box, but does it help towards the objective that you're trying to achieve in that scenario? So this is what I really mean. It's trying to go back to first principles and making sure that we have something that's kind of robust and resilient for that application.
Yusuf, can I suggest you just restart just the top of that part where we're talking about the requirement of the loft conversion. It's even more basic than they're escaping, right? The loft conversion scenario is where you don't want the fire to go to the second floor because people are jumping out of the window in the first place.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's again, that's what you've got those two means of escape. So that's why you've got the door on the top of the stairs, and you've got the secondary, the escape window on that second floor. But the central point that I'm trying to communicate here is that there is a very specific objective that the guidance and then inversely that the product has to achieve. And what we're trying to do is optimize to meet that objective, going back to first principles. And I think that's often forgot if you're just thinking about ticking a box.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. So this is, by the way, I haven't done anything with fire safety in terms of a risk assessor for a long time, but this is the old egress window.
Yes.
I can't remember what the height is. I don't know if you can remember, but it was the whole hang and drop type element. And it was like, if you can hang out the window and drop, you can drop. It's a ridiculous height as well, if I remember rightly. It's not something that I would want to do.
No, and you wouldn't want you to try to convince your grandma to do it either.
And I think one of the interesting parts of sort of being involved in some of the standards discussions is you get multiple technical experts in the room kind of debating some of the assumptions that kind of underpin our guidance, our codes of practice. And it's not always a consensus. Some people believe something, some people are pushing for this or that, but eventually you get to a kind of a common understanding. But I think it's paying attention to those assumptions that really kind of give you an opportunity to kind of understand and make sure that you're producing products or you're producing material that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, what advice would you have for anyone else that's looking to introduce an innovative sort of, I guess, physical product into the fire safety sector?
So I think the first thing that I would say is that I would love there to be more innovation because we need it. We shouldn't be complacent about the successes that we have. There are still too many people getting injured or are dying as a result of domestic fires. So we need young, old, energetic people to try and help us kind of solve these problems. That's the first thing. The second part would be going back to the sort of our journey, and that is really ensuring that you have a good grounding in knowledge. So trying to understand the space and the principles, and then just grit, because it's hard work. You get a lot of pushback. So we've been lucky that we've been supported by a number of different people. There's experts in the industry who have helped steer us and guide us. So there is a community out there if you are looking who will spend their time if you are looking to try and do something.
Yeah, there is a small community out there.
Yes.
Yeah, and we all like to talk to each other because it's such a small community that goes through the same issues. Yeah. So, but I echo exactly what Yusuf said. The grit is necessary. Had we understood early on how relevant standards are for everything you do, even when it's an adjacent standard. These things are relevant, and understanding that really well, how they fit each other, how they influence each other, is very important. It took us years to even give them that the importance they needed, but now we've become, as required, very fluent in them. But that's a painful, necessary step to be able to navigate this world very well.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Honestly, I love it. I love what you've done. I can totally understand the industry is it appears to be very challenging sometimes to change, but I think it's necessary, and I think most people appreciate it. I just think there's a couple that can be quite resistant, and that can be hard to overcome. But that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile and incredibly important.
Oh no, it is very worthwhile, and we're still in our mission to make fire suppression so worthy and so valuable to those who need it that they will want to, or somebody will be wanting to pay for it. So that is ultimately where we're trying to get to still, and there's a lot of evolution to get there still, but there's plenty of space for many more to do similar things within the industry. And if you think of our system as a innovation, so bizarre from the rest of the industry, but if you think of consumer products, like we're doing something that has been done to airplanes 30 years ago, to cars 40 years ago, and
Yes.
there's nothing new there, right? The reliability of airplanes and cars are extremely are way better than what they were decades ago. So we know that that's where we have to go to. So there's plenty of space for much more innovation. We're just starting in this path, and there's way more space for many more other people.
The thing that comes to mind is that so much of what we take for granted now in our built environment in terms of fire safety, at one point it was a small group of people pushing something new, and they trialed it, they saw some success, and then people looked at it and thought, you know what, this is a good idea, and now it's written into guidance, and now it's commonplace. And that's really what we try to keep clinging on to hold on to, is that we need people breaking through, trying new things, so that we can advance things. So yeah, that's what we're keen to do.
Yeah, amazing. Honestly, amazing, guys. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Honestly, appreciate it.
Well,
No problem.
we thank you.
Cool, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, then please like and subscribe. It really does make a difference to the show. Thank you so much, and see you in the next episode.